actiones nostras, Domine aspirando preveni et adjuvando, prosequere ut cuncta nostra oratio et operatio a te semper incipiat et per te corrupta finiatur. Direct, we beg thee, O Lord, our prayers and our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, so that every work of ours may always begin with thee, and through thee come to completion. Amen. We begin with this traditional prayer found in the Roman Missal that was used by Valentin Tomberg before he carried out his work. So, good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. Roger and I are here together again today.
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
On this Ember Friday in Pentecost week. And we're here to talk about Valentin Tomberg. And would you like to just give us a little introduction here?
Yes, I will. There's quite a lot I want to say. Look, maybe I begin by saying that two types of viewers get attracted to our YouTube channel. Broadly speaking, those who really know Valentin Tomberg and those who don't. And it's necessary, I think, to say a little bit about Valentin Tomberg for those of you who don't know him, but really I suspect that this episode is mainly going to be of interest to the first type of listener who is really very familiar with Tomberg's work. But for those of you who don't know, Valentin Tomberg was a very unusual Catholic convert. He had been an anthroposophist in his youth, which is to say that he was in the esoteric school of Rudolf Steiner, and it's necessary to say that for things that I think we'll be coming to. Very briefly, Rudolf Steiner pioneered a form of what he considered to be esoteric Christianity. It's often confused with the New Age. I have to say that although there are very significant problems with Rudolf Steiner's thinking, including a terrible critique of the Catholic Church, Rudolf Steiner had incredible reverence for Christ. He saw that Christ on the cross had changed everything, and that makes him very different from a New Ager. But nonetheless, we are here in areas that will sound New Agey to people, esoteric, things like that. We are very much in that kind of territory. And as I say, Valentin Tomberg was a Catholic convert. And he helped me. This is a key thing to everything we're going to say here. I've said it many times before on this channel. I think that without Tomberg, I could never be a Catholic today. I think that I would still be absolutely caught in all my New Age stuff. I think I might be something like an Anglican, liberal Anglican, very New Agey Anglican, but I could never be Catholic without him, let alone traditionally Catholic. So there's a lot more to say about Tomberg, but we throw that out there now. And yes, although I owe far more than I can ever say to Valentin Tomberg, so do you, Kim. And, maybe we're going to bring out, well, we're not going to bring out, we're going to bring out some of the great gifts that you've received from Tomberg.
Yes, I've never spoken about Valentin Tomberg before, and because of Roger's connection and his reading of Tomberg's magnum opus through the point that Roger was converting to Christianity and it having had such huge impact on you, that we see how much Tomberg brought you to the church. When you're very close to someone, as we were close to each other, and they're reading something that's affecting their life in such a way, it's natural to become interested.
Yeah.
And when we left Cambridge just after our marriage to move to Germany to be with Dr. Michael French, which we spoke about in the last episode, I became interested in reading Tomberg's magnum opus. And so I began, and I have to say that so this was before we were Catholic. We were now both baptized in the Anglican Church and had moved to Germany. And I began reading the book, and what struck me immediately was a quality of love.
Yeah.
A quality of deep, solemn love that seemed to pour out of every page as I went.
Yeah.
And I think, we were going to make this episode about how Tomberg actually, through reading the book, and we wonder if he actually did guide us through that to go to France.
Yeah.
And we were going to speak about our life in France. But that will have to wait for another time, or maybe later in this episode.
Yeah.
Because certain things have changed.
Yeah.
So I think we need to come back to you, darling Roger.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but I just do want to clarify certain things you've said, Kim, for the benefit of people who haven't heard the last episode, and you don't need to hear the last episode, or know nothing about this. Yes, this is episode 5, we're starting now. The episode 4, you don't need to have heard it before, but it's really an episode where you and I, darling, are speaking about our deepening conversion. Yes, we go into how Tomberg, led us into the church, and we touch on that, but we also touch on far more to do with the life in Europe, in Ireland, in France. It's not just about Tomberg, but we really did start speaking about Tomberg there. So I think you said you've never spoken about Tomberg before. Well, you were actually speaking in the last episode, and you've
but not personally.
Yeah.
How he affected me, it was about your conversion.
Yes. So I want to just give that as a background to what we're saying, and I want to say a few more things in terms of background. Yes, love, you've just alluded to a kind of change of plan, and I'm going to come to that change of plan, but I want to just say this. Maybe before this. Yeah, I'll say this. Something happened yesterday that in a sense was quite dramatic for us. And I'm aware that by bringing this up and out right now, bringing in drama, we will start people wondering, well, what has this happened? And I don't want to get to it yet. I want to take a few more minutes. And I think that, this actually exists a lot in YouTube episodes, that somebody tries to create a point of drama that will hook the viewer. I think that that's very questionable indeed. I'm not saying I'm innocent of it, but I think wanting to hook people, well, I'm far from innocent in this, but I don't want to get to it quite yet. So I somehow do feel a need to set the stage here. Yes, you and I, love, as you were saying, we were both intending to do an episode on Tomberg, and you were really with these things about continuing what we were doing in the last episode, where we were speaking about our journey through Europe, and you really wanted to do an episode about our journey through France, really focusing on France and how this ties in with certain things connected with Tomberg, that Tomberg did write his magnum opus in French. And that's a very strange thing when you think about it, because Tomberg was a Russian. He lived in Holland and Germany, but as far as I know, he never spent any time in any French-speaking country apart from a 2-week visit to France in 1958. And for me, there are profound questions as to why he wrote his greatest book in French. And yes, while you and I were in France, Kim, we lived there, something like 2.5 years. While we were there, we were beginning to get real insights into why Tomberg had written in French, to say the least. So that was part of our original intention in this episode, and maybe by the end we will still come to that. We will still come to that to one degree or another. But I want to bring in just some other things now that are also setting the scene here, setting the stage. I wanted to do something different with the episode. I really wanted to say more about how it's so necessary to separate Tomberg from the anthroposophy, the sort of esoteric Christianity of Rudolf Steiner that Tomberg renounced. I've labored about this in previous episodes, but I'm going to say it briefly again now. Valentin Tomberg specifically asked that his early anthroposophical writings never be republished. There's another work that, is not in mainstream circulation yet, but he actually wanted it burned. And I am very concerned about these issues that with people, and I think they're good, well-meaning people, who want to perpetuate Tomberg's early anthroposophical legacy against his wishes. I think it's leading to all kinds of unintended problems. And I was intending to speak about that. Okay? But we may well get to that, we may not. But before we get to this kind of, dramatic event yesterday, I'm sorry for keeping the drama going. I mean that, but I want to set the stage here. I was actually having trouble already focusing on what to do with this Tomberg episode because I was so caught up in something else. And I want to tell you briefly what that is because it may actually turn out to be relevant as well. I am really with certain things in my life right now to do very much with the New Age movement that I was part of for 20 years. I sometimes call this the New Age replacement of Christianity. I even have an episode on this channel called the Occult Replacement of Christianity, because there are all kinds of things to do with esoteric currents speaking about things like the Christ consciousness that replace real Christianity, the Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our salvation and the salvation of the world, with very strange Eastern ideas, very strange ideas to do with Christ consciousness. And I've been thrown back into that in a certain way, and I've had to really ask, what is this about? At age 16, I went to the seminal New Age community of Findhorn in Scotland. We're not going to go into that right now, but it could be relevant to later on, because again, it is Valentin Tomberg who liberated me from this occult replacement of Christianity. It is Valentin Tomberg who showed me it's not about Christ consciousness, as Alice Bailey puts it, and now Oprah Winfrey puts it, and people like this put it. It's about Christ dying for us on the cross. So I was with all of that, and it was hard to focus on Tomberg, but then, yes, something happened.
Well, it's more than just one thing, isn't it?
Yes, you're right, Kim. There's a kind of complex of factors here, and I realise I still maybe haven't said enough. Something, I don't know how long it is now, the last 10 days, 2 weeks maybe, something was starting to happen on the internet that I was paying very little attention to, even deliberately paying very little attention to. I will come to that. But it all seemed to center around the book by Sebastian Morello, Mysticism, Magic, and Monasteries, that I spoke about at length in episode 45 of my own, episodes on this channel. I spoke about how very deeply moved I was by this book. This is last year. It's not a book that I necessarily agree with everything in, but I felt it was a very, very important book. And I devoted, much of an episode. Again, it's episode 45 if you want more. So I began to realize that the book was being attacked. And it is a contentious book, and I can understand why it would, draw certain people who may not really understand what Sebastian is trying to do there. And there were articles, and I have not read them. There was an article by an Orthodox man. There was an article by another Catholic.
Yes, I can understand why Sebastian may not be understood by some.
Yeah, we'll probably get into that later, but what I really want to get at now is that, I was aware the book was being attacked. There were articles about it. I haven't read the articles. I know there was an article by an Orthodox man whose name I can't recall right now. There was an article by someone called Thomas Myris or Miras, who's going to be relevant to what we're going to say here later. although we're not going to go into him much either, because, I don't really know what he's saying. But I think I should just say that I glanced at Miras's piece. Maybe I only looked at it 90 seconds. But you can get a lot in 90 seconds. And I think certainly, I've seen a number of tweets about it, and I've seen notes on Substack. I also know that my friend Michael Martin has written a couple of pieces in response to it, and Sebastian Morello has written, I believe, a couple of pieces in response to it. I think that's right. I've read none of those pieces yet. And people might find that strange, perhaps, because, what Sebastian Morello's book? Did I say it's called Mysticism, Magic?
Yes, you did. Monasteries.
Monasteries. The book has a considerable debt to Valentin Tomberg, which is partly why it hit me so deeply. I said on the episode 45 that in many ways it seemed like a profound continuation of many themes that Tomberg was with. So given how focused I am on Tomberg, if it seems odd that I wouldn't be reading this, and this is true, there are two reasons here. One is, as I say, I was very, very focused on issues to do with the New Age replacement of Christianity. And I need to focus on things one step at a time. There's also some difficulties in our lives. But I guess there's another set of issues here, Kim, and I'm going to say this. Shakespeare and Macbeth, Macbeth says, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. That's a quote I actually learned when I was quite young, when I was blown away by Shakespeare's genius. And that's going to be relevant because I want to speak about Tomberg's genius before the end of this episode. Okay, I'm digressing. But I had a moment in my youth when I was in awe of Shakespeare's genius, and that is also how I feel about Tomberg. I keep digressing, although it's a relevant digression. But I do consider Tomberg a genius in the sense that Shakespeare was a genius. I think his writings are going to be helping the church for centuries to come. And I don't say that lightly. But anyway, my point was, Macbeth, in his utter despair, was talking about life being full of sound and fury. Well, life is God's creation, however fallen. But certainly the internet is so often a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And in order to not be an idiot myself on the internet, which is, not necessarily easy, because I'm sort of here on the internet pontificating as well, I've basically found that I need to abstain as much as possible from the sound and fury on the internet. That is really, really an important thing for me. It fits in with what I've been saying at our Substack Love about us being married hermits, about really needing contemplative focus. It also has a lot to do with what Tomberg actually means by Hermeticism, which is not necessarily what people think he means. He speaks about Hermeticism, and this is going to be relevant later, real Hermeticism, Christian Hermeticism. We went into this also in episode 45, about contemplation, Christian contemplation. He even says, I think it's right at the beginning of the first letter of the book, that it is best suited for recluses. This is about contemplating the soul of the world, including the diseases and problems of the soul of the world. So, what with, my own set of personal problems, what with a set of problems for the world about the New Age replacement of Christianity, I elected not to read any of this kind of stuff on the internet. I did not read the original articles, and I did not read, as much as I respect Michael Martin and respect Sebastian, I have not read their responses yet. I think I did see a Substack note from Peter Kwasniewski, who is also in this mix, because he published Sebastian's book. So I saw people that I really deeply respect. I don't always agree with them, but I saw people being attacked, and they've really been in my prayers, but I felt like I had to have my focus elsewhere.
Yes, you and I find it's really important to focus on our work by keeping distance from things like that unless it's necessary not to.
Yes, and I'm sure that I am going to be looking at a little of this now. I'm sure that I will be looking at Michael Martin's pieces and Sebastian's pieces because, however much I disagree with them on certain points, they are people that I really cherish and respect. But now we are finally coming, in my windabout way, now we are finally coming to what happened yesterday. And what happened yesterday, look, I want to be as transparent as I can here. I want to be sincere. Tomberg writes about sincerity throughout the whole of Meditations on the Tarot, his magnum opus. At one point, he says that when sincerity is present in the human voice, I think that's the quote, the angels fall down in adoration when one is truly sincere. And I think it's a pretty rare occasion because all of us are so fallen. We have so many games, we have so many stuff. I think that I want to be, my aspiration here is to be as sincere as possible because this has affected me. It's distressed me. It's distressed you, Kim.
Yeah.
Although I want to say that I don't really know how much anyone here meant to distress me. We're going to explain this. But to my considerable shock, I found a tweet yesterday. And the tweet was from this person, Thomas Myris or Miras. And he seemed, and I stress seemed, because I really do not know the truth here of this. I haven't, but he seemed to be suggesting that Sebastian and Morello and I had been having a conversation where I was speaking about Tomberg in his, quote, divinized condition in the celestial spheres, inspiring Sebastian. And there's a lot of, I'm not sure how much we're going to go into this, Tomberg as a daemon, language that I would never in a million years use, ways that I would not speak. And I don't yet know all the ins and outs of this yet. But given that this is out there on the internet and maybe this controversy is going to keep on going a bit, I somehow feel a need to say, no, I did not say these things. I do not speak like this. And I'm struggling to understand this. Now, the natural thing to do, and I haven't yet done it, and I'm sure I will do it at some point, is, try to find out where allegedly Sebastian Morello sort of said the things that Myris has picked up. And I really do suspect, but I can't say this with authority, that Myris is really getting the wrong end of the stick here, but I can't say this with authority because I have not listened. And I was inclined not to listen. I was inclined not to find this. But you actually, darling Kim, you actually did go and find the relevant podcast that Sebastian was speaking about, and that's also part of the story here.
Yeah, I found it. I began listening maybe to 3, maybe 4 minutes, and I was distressed by it, and I was also surprised or shocked because the words on that tweet incriminating both you and Sebastian Morello are a bit skewed. Sebastian, on the little that I heard, is very clear that he is using his own words to describe something that you intimated to him.
Yeah.
That they are not your words.
Yes.
So,
yes, that thank you, love. That is the point now. I just want to say, be transparent. You've heard these 4 minutes. At some point, we're going to probably be listening to more of it. When the time is right. It's almost like the major point. I don't want to get involved in this episode in the whole entire set of controversial things that may or may not be up. I think it's only like I want to make a statement that I wouldn't say these things, and you're saying from the 4 minutes you heard. I mean, you've used the word incriminate. Well, I don't know. I didn't hear it. I haven't heard it. I somehow imagine, but what do I know, that Myris really means well here. I certainly believe Sebastian means well here, because I know Sebastian a little. As I said in episode 45, I only met him last year, but we had a very, very, very special and special conversation. I think I've spoken to him twice, but I had a very special and beautiful time with him when I was in London last year. So I'm not really wanting to get into all of this right now, and there's probably like a lot here, but I do just want to say that I didn't say these things, and I want to say that my imagination here, without sort of excavating all of this more, is that there's some kind of strange process of Chinese whispers going on. That I did say things to Sebastian when I met him in London, um, um, and Sebastian heard them in whatever way he did, and then Sebastian spoke about them apparently on this podcast, which I've not listened to, and then Myris, if I pronounce his name correctly, is kind of seizing on that. So that's going on. At least that's my interpretation of what's going on right now. And given that I haven't done the huge excavation of it, I could be wrong. Really, right now, this is to just simply make a flat statement. I did not say these things. It's not the way I speak. However, however, I don't. I want to be sincere here. I want to be sincere and I want to be honest. I'm not going to say that what has apparently gone through these Chinese whispers, and yes, for all I know, Myris is trying to incriminate. I don't know, that's a very strong word you've used, Kim, but anyway, you've said it and we're not going to go back there. I don't know what's going on. Um, um, I guess I'm with the sort of phrase, there's no smoke, there's no fire, there's no smoke without fire. Something is going on here. Something is going on here, and it's come out in a way that is entirely foreign to the way I speak. But somehow I felt in contemplating all this that I do need to sort of try to come a little bit, to what I said to Sebastian in this very special meeting that we had. And you've made clear, Kim, to me from the 3 or 4 minutes that you listened to, that Sebastian is also saying that we had this lovely meeting. So I think what the real essence here, is that I am suggesting that Valentin Tomberg is some kind of saint who is working with people in this world. That is true. In fact, just to come to Myris's quote, I'll just read this. Now, I'm sure these guys have some explanation about how, we really meant that Tomberg is a saint guiding us from heaven. Well, yes, that is what I meant. That is what I meant, which may be controversial and shocking. I certainly don't talk in terms of Hellenistic words like daemon and divinized condition and all these kinds of things. And then Myris actually goes on to say something that I actually agree with. He's saying, what is the point of using this kind of language? As I say, it's a language I don't use. There might be a point in using it, I believe that Graham Greene, the Catholic author Graham Greene, if I remember correctly, spoke about his daemon. I could be wrong there. I could be getting confused. But certainly great Catholic artists and thinkers have spoken like that. But Myris goes on to say, is reality insufficiently enchanted when you call someone a saint, but properly enchanted when you call him a daemon? Well, quite. A saint is the language I would use because there's no greater enchantment than a saint imbued by Jesus Christ coming into the world. That is the language that I would use. But this, of course, brings us to an issue that will sound very, very strange to people. That I am speaking about Valentin Tomberg as a saint in this world, an uncanonized saint. But I feel like in trying to be as transparent and as sincere here as I can, Sebastian has clearly, brought forth this idea, and I just want it out there. I think it just needs to be owned that is indeed how I speak about Tomberg. Now, I'm aware, Kim, I'm talking a lot. You may want to come in, but it often seems in these episodes that it seems to be that I need to say a lot at first, and then you come in later with the very moving things you have to say. But anyway, I really want to unpack this a bit more now, because it's obviously the whole things I'm doing on the channel about Tomberg have been my project. They've not been yours, and I want to talk about this.
And it's important that you cover this now.
Yes, thank you, love. Thank you. So, I have said on this channel that I believe Valentin Tomberg is a saint and a genius. We already started to cover the genius bit with Shakespeare. I'm just going to expand on that before I come to the saint bit. I want to say that when I was young at school, this just give you a little bit of background. This was an American school. I remember that there was this kind of idea that Shakespeare was boring. You had to read it. And somebody began teaching us Julius Caesar in American high school, and my mouth dropped open. I can really say that at age 15 or 16 years old. I actually identified with the relationships going on there with Brutus and Cassius. It was like my own life. I won't go into how but it was mirroring my own life, the dynamic between Brutus and Cassius and Julius Caesar. And I began to glimpse the profound depths of Shakespeare. And then I moved to England, and I studied Macbeth and Hamlet and King Lear. At school, had a very, very brilliant teacher in England, and my sense of Shakespeare's genius, like this incredible genius. And then you add to this, all of Shakespeare is in poetry, or nearly all of it. It is like this incredible insight into human nature, this incredible. And then it's all in iambic pentameter, blank verse. And I can remember this as a teenager, thinking, how could anybody write so profoundly in such a compact space? And then, many years later, when I encountered Valentin Tomberg's, Meditations on the Tarot, this is the book that we're saying is his magnum opus. And I want to say, I have to keep saying this on this channel, this book has nothing to do with, divining the future with tarot cards. That's not to say that it doesn't have other problematic features, and I think we're going to come to that. But it has nothing to do with that. I began reading this book, we began touching in on this on the last episode. It's like the last episode is kind of like a guideline for this. And in the late 90s, and it kind of took us to Germany, where we met Michael French. We went into all this, in the last episode. That's kind of a background for this. I'm sure we're coming back to it. But I just couldn't get over this magnum opus. This was like Shakespeare. How did he do this? How did he do this? How did he write? I read it again and again and again.
How many times?
I've read it something like 15 times, and I don't want to brag, but I've read it in English. I've read a lot of it in French now. I've really tried to really focus on the book, because the book was a book of genius. And so I don't say that lightly. Look, I've actually come recently, but it's only recently, love, to thinking about Belloc as a genius. For years I would have thought, no, Belloc's not a genius. No, he's not like Shakespeare. He's not like Tomberg. And no, Belloc's not like Shakespeare, and he's not like Tomberg. But just in the last couple of years, it's like I have to struggle with it. Am I going to say Belloc's a genius, or am I not going to say Belloc's a genius? Belloc's a genius too, but his genius does not compare.
He's a little genius.
He's a little genius. In my view, for whatever it's worth, Belloc's genius, what Belloc was doing in these 100 books or more he wrote, Tomberg is doing in one book. And it's vast. It's vast. I've spoken about this before. Meditations on the Tarot is like 100 books in one. It's a book about Christology. It's a book about the church. It's a book about angels. Yes, it's a book about Hermeticism. Yes, it has reflections on meditatively contemplating the images of the tarot, not for the purpose of divination. It's a book about Christendom. It's a book about psychology. It's a book about sincerity. What I just said about the angels fall down in adoration, when the human voice is truly sincere.
It's a book about saints. It's a book about love.
It's a book about love. It's a book about love.
Contemplation at the deepest level.
Yes, love. It's like, I'm afraid, in speaking on this channel, as I said at the beginning, we have two types of audience here. Those who know the book, those who maybe feel the book is completely changing their lives as it changed yours and my life, and those who don't know the book. And those who don't know the book, if you're still listening to this far, you will probably be thinking, well, isn't this over the top? Comparing him to Shakespeare, saying he's a saint and a genius. And I'm not going to try to convince any of this. The only thing that will convince you is if you engage with his writings. But my purpose here is not to convince anyone that he's a saint or a genius, and I don't want to canonize him as a saint, you know. My purpose here is because Myrus or Mirus, you know, has somehow brought out that I spoke to Sebastian in London. You know, I mean, maybe I say that this is what I truly recall saying about Sebastian. I was just deeply moved by this book he's written, Mysticism, Magic, and Monasteries. You know, I had an advanced copy of it. And as I say, I don't agree with everything there. I don't. It gets into very complex ground. But certain things he's doing there are incredibly important. And we went into this in the episode, or I went into this in my episode about Sebastian's book. You know, gosh, I'm digressing, but essentially the book has a great deal to do with how our thinking has become entirely Cartesian, entirely materialistic, and Sebastian is even saying, and I think rightly so, that the church's thinking, the modern church's thinking, has become Cartesian and materialistic. You know, he speaks about, just for example, he speaks about how the modern church is about blessing people, but the church of old was about all kinds of blessings. You know, we've spoken about this in Ireland, how holy water was blessed and thrown all over the ground, you know, just all over farmers' fields, cars. The church was not simply about the salvation of souls. It was about the salvation of the world. It was about blessing, blessing, blessing. And one of the brilliant things, it's one of many brilliant things in Sebastian's book, one of many brilliant things, is he's really bringing out, you know, how the post-Vatican II church has lost that. And I have to say that Sebastian, you know, takes the problems back further than Vatican II. I'm beginning to lose my thread here. I want to, maybe you just want to say something there, Kim. I get a sense that you were with wanting to say something about the blessing of the church.
Well, what I want to say, the little that I have read of Sebastian Morello's book, it shows me that he is somebody who is concerned about the loss of the supernatural.
Yeah.
And Tomberg is very concerned with the same thing.
Yeah.
And so am I.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you're saying that, say we have a rosary and you want that rosary blessed, that rosary itself becomes something different to before it was blessed.
Yes, yes.
The priest is not blessing the person.
Yes, yes.
Now that doesn't mean with my blessed rosary I'm not going to be blessed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that rosary has become a sacramental. It's become different.
Yeah.
Just as when the holy water was thrown on the fields.
All across Ireland, yeah.
Say with the St. Mark's greater litanies.
Yeah, yeah.
And the crops were blessed.
Yeah.
To bring a good harvest.
Yeah.
It's these sorts of things. And also, yes, the word magic in that sense is the magic that comes from Christ through his church into the world.
Yes, yes. Yes, you've taken this in a different direction. I think it's good, and I want to bring this back to why I say Tomberg is not only a genius but a saint. I need to bring it back to this, but let me just say this very quickly. Tomberg's book is written in this Hermetic language, and we're going to try to explain more. Again, episode 45 about Sebastian. But Tomberg is speaking about what he calls sacred magic, and he speaks about, you know, there's a line in there that sacred magic is above all about the priesthood and sacraments. You know, maybe I will come to that. You know, no one is more involved in that than priests, you know, in the Catholic Church and of course the Orthodox Church who have the sacraments. We're really branching all over the place. I do want to come back to that later in the episode. I really need to make a note of that. It's great what you said, love. It's great what you said. But let me just stay with my perhaps contentious, you know, statement that I believe Tomberg is a genius and a saint. Not trying to convince any of you of that. That is, though, the context that is necessary for understanding whatever I said to Sebastian back in London last year. And now I just want to try saying something that goes further than anything I've said before. I brought Tomberg out in my Cor Jesu Sacratissimum book a few years ago. I haven't really spoken about him much on the channel until the last 3 or 4 years. But as I began to, sort of publicly speak about Tomberg, I began getting mail from people across the world, um, suggesting how Tomberg had changed their lives. I can't give details of this, without betraying people's confidence, but they were all kinds of people. They weren't just, strange Hermeticists or things like that. There was a Protestant. I really can't give details here, but he spoke about. I hope you won't mind my saying this. I'm saying this vaguely enough. I'm sure it's okay to say this. He spoke about how a prophetic dream with Tomberg had changed everything for him. And then later on, he said he had an experience, I think something like 10 years later, where he saw something in the dream in real life. I can't give too many details there, but it was an amazing, amazing story. And he had come to the Catholic faith, through being a Protestant Christian. Michael French, who we've spoken about here, who helped us so much in Germany and Switzerland, he basically spoke about Tomberg saving his marriage. And he spoke about Tomberg in other ways. And there's more mail I have. I can't even remember some of it very well right now. The point is, I started getting mail from people who felt that Valentin Tomberg was in some way intervening in their lives. This may sound extremely strange to people. As I say, the only way you're going to get it is if you engage with the book and you feel not just the genius, but I would say the moral genius. You feel the holiness coming out of the book, which is not to say that Tomberg's perfect, which is not to say that there aren't problems in the book. I'm going to come back to that. But there is a moral genius in the book. And the next idea that I really want to bring across, I'm not sure if I've spoken about this before on these things, but when Tomberg wrote his magnum opus, he left it with specific instructions to a man called Martin Creela. It may be important to go into Martin Creela at some point in this episode, so I'll just drop the name Martin Creela. And the specific instruction was that Tomberg died in 1973, is that the book should not be published for at least 10 years after he died. And yes, there was a slightly small-scale early edition, but we won't go into the details. The major editions really started coming out in 1985, 1983, things like that. And why did he not want the book published until after he died? Well, he said that he would be able to help people, but he needed to have died for 10 years before he could really help people reading the book. This is all very strange, but I would point out that there are certain saints who said similar things, and they said them before they were canonized. So, I can't remember all the details now, but, St. Pio, Padre Pio, certainly said that he would be able to help people after he died. St. Therese of Lisieux, suggested, the same. In fact, I think these saints said they would be more effective after they died. I'm not saying that Tomberg was trying to compare himself, and I'm not trying to compare Tomberg to, an incredible saint like, Padre Pio. I'm not trying to do that. Oh, Saint Therese, yeah, Saint Therese. I'm not trying to do that. I wouldn't presume to make a judgment like that. Never would I presume to make a judgment of that. But somehow, in some kind of mystical process, because I believe that Tomberg was a mystic as well, he had an intuition, a premonition, a sense, call it what you will, that this book, he would be able to help people through this book 10 years after he died. And that is exactly how I see what is going on. In fact, sorry.
He says at the very end of the beginning of the book.
Yeah, there's a little preface, just a little preface, yes.
Your friend greets you, dear unknown friend, from beyond the grave.
Yes.
And I want to just say, the dead speak. Whether they're saints or not.
Yes.
The dead speak.
Yes, we have to be careful with this. We have to be careful with this, because obviously there's all kinds of horrible things, where people do seances and of course you don't mean that. I know you don't mean that, love. Sorry. I apologize. Of course I know you don't mean anything like that, but I'm just concerned. I guess maybe right now I'm maybe even hyper concerned that people will misunderstand. I think, Myris, whoever he is, has severely misunderstood Sebastian. At least that's my impression. As I said, I haven't excavated all of this, and maybe I will, maybe I won't. But I do feel like there's a need to be careful. So when you say the dead speak, obviously, there are people who try to do terrible things with that. Absolutely. But yes, I think you and I have both felt things with our own parents. I feel, doesn't mean I'm trying to convince anyone here. Doesn't mean I'm trying to say this. But, after my father died, I do feel his presence. I'm not trying to evoke him or anything like that. I'm praying for him. And you felt things, and I'm not sure this is the place to go into all of this, but I think what we're saying is that there's something natural here. And down through the centuries, the communion of saints, people pray to Saint Anthony, to help them, and people miraculously find. I mean, you would know more about this than I do, Kim. You would know more about, the various saints, or, tell me the name of the saint who heals our throats. I've forgotten.
Saint Blaise.
Saint Blaise, yes, of course, Saint Blaise. The Catholic Church is about the intervention of saints in the world. So I don't really consider this, too weird. There's a line in the Myris thing about Sebastian apparently saying all this could give people heebie-jeebies. Well, quite, because of certain terrible things that give people heebie-jeebies. What I want to just say is that this is, if you believe in the just basic idea that the saints are with us, what I'm talking about, and what I spoke about with Sebastian has nothing to do with heebie-jeebies. It's to do with graces that God allows certain saints from heaven to be present in this world. Just to come back to my point, I started getting all this mail from different people, or people have related things to me over the years, how Tomberg was present in their lives. And I'm now going to say something. Maybe we can cut it. I'm now going to say something. This is a sort of very, very private part of my life. This is a very, very private part of my life. But I personally, and I'm not going to elaborate this, I personally cannot escape the feeling that in my dedicated study, my dedicated reading of Tomberg's works, as I say, Michael French speaks publicly about how Tomberg saved his marriage. I feel Tomberg saved me from the New Age. But there are ways that I have not been able to escape the idea that Tomberg was a saint present in my own life. And I think maybe we're going to talk about that a bit more as we keep going with this episode, Kim. But, what we find with these episodes is that they usually work out best if we take them a day at a time. So I think we're going to stop for now, sort of pray and ponder about what we've said, need to be deep about it, I think we're going to take a break now. If you're listening to this, there'll be some church bells, and then we'll be back in 5-10 seconds, but it might be, 24 hours for us. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, you're flagging, Kim. Yeah. All right. Let's continue tomorrow.
I don't drink coffee.
Yeah, you don't drink coffee. Because, no, I'm going to say this, love. You don't drink coffee. I, alas, do need coffee, but, both of us, try to avoid a lot of the stimulants that many people have, but yeah, I drink coffee, and I think that also comes with the territory of trying to be a recluse and a married hermit. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a bit odd, although I've never claimed to be anything, less than a bit odd, because I suggested, Kim and I suggested that after the bell, Kim and I would be back the next day, but Kim's not with me now. Why is Kim not with me now? Well, one answer is that it's the middle of the night now, and Kim is asleep, and it's a very strange night. Iran has retaliated. at Israel, and very, very terrible things are going on this night, but that doesn't answer the question of why am I now speaking to you alone. I want to say that Kim will be resuming with us. The next time we will definitely be with Kim. But why am I doing this? Well, Kim and I were discussing the fact that it did seem like it would be important to say more about this difficult subject of Hermeticism, even though Christian Hermeticism, even though I really went into it in episode 45, the last episode on Sebastian Morello, and I've kept saying again and again, well, go back to episode 45, go back to episode 45, but it really occurred to me. Kim agreed with this. Kim agreed with me with this. That as I was editing this together, because that's what I do, I take all these things we say and I edit them together, chop them down, cut them up, edit them. That maybe I would want to create a segment where I would just drop in, I don't know, for a few minutes. I'm not sure how long. Drop in some of the things where I was clarifying the nature of Hermeticism, Christian Hermeticism, from episode 45. That means you don't need to go back to it, and it will give Kim and I something to sort of riff on, to keep going with, as we resume the conversation. So, yeah, I just want to drop these things in now. Yeah, for those of you who are really very deeply concerned about Christian Hermeticism, and you have real reason to be concerned, and I mean to address that in this episode as well. I really do. I want to say some things about that, but it really truly depends on what we mean by Hermeticism. And I think what I want to do is read you a brief passage from Morello's book, Sebastian's book, where he deals with this, because the problem is that the term Hermeticism, it's something that is elastic. It's easily stretched beyond all definition. Anyway, here is what Sebastian says. Typically, Christians are uneasy at any mention of Hermeticism or esotericism. This is understandable, for such terms have come to mean anything that is not modern, mainstream Christian spirituality. In this way, Hermeticism is rather like the term alternative medicine, which doesn't tell you what it is, but what it's not. Namely, not modern mainstream medicine. Thus, alternative medicine can mean anything from eating cooked elderberries to support one's immune system to Reiki. Likewise, depending on what one is reading, Hermetic or esoteric could mean anything from the Tombergian practice of concentration without effort. And Morello says this is a practice similar to those recommended in Jean-Pierre de Caussade's Abandonment to Divine Providence, to the demonic sex magic of Aleister Crowley. All right, so many things could be put under the name of Hermetic. Maybe I just make a little note on what Sebastian has just said there about Tombergian practice of concentration without effort. We've spoken about this in these episodes before, where Tomberg speaks about, have you ever drunk silence? Tomberg is speaking about a need to cultivate a practice of silence, where the waves of silence become so deep that it is like drinking silence. That is what Tomberg says is at the heart of Christian Hermeticism, and we're coming back to that. But given all these kinds of problems, one thing that I'm very fond of that Sebastian has done here is that he has named in a single very good sentence, I think, what he means by Hermetic. And I'll read you it. What I mean by Hermetic is a set of practices and disciplines of mind, will, and imagination that habituate the practitioner to a vision of the world that acknowledges it as God's icon. There's a lot in that single sentence. In terms of seeing the world as God's icon, Sebastian Morello is speaking about seeing God's creation, even though that creation has been partially destroyed by sin, partially destroyed by the fall, it still speaks to the glory and splendor of God, of the creation, and we can understand, God through that. And that is very key to what Tomberg is speaking about. He speaks about Hermeticists as being theologians of the world, as opposed to theologians of Scripture. That Hermeticists are those who try to understand and see God through the world. But we can really ponder this wonderful sentence from Sebastian here. A set of practices and disciplines of mind, will, and imagination. These are practices to do with how we think, how we imagine the world, what we do in the world, that lead us to really seeing the glory of God, through the creation, even though it's a fallen creation. Tomberg is very much about the same thing than I would like. And I feel like I should just back up a little bit, because some of you, when I speak about Tomberg speaking about Hermeticists as theologians of the world versus ordinary theologians who are theologians of Scripture, i.e., theologians try to discern God through Scripture, and Hermeticists try to discern God through the world, that may sound very strange. I hope it will become a little bit clearer as we proceed, as will also, what Sebastian Morello means by practices of, thinking and imagination and so forth. But maybe just in an effort to make this slightly clearer at this point, it may be useful to point out that Hermeticism is seen as going back to the legendary Egyptian sage Hermes Trismegistus, of whom there's a fragment called the Emerald Table, and the most famous statement from that, many of you will know this very well, is "as above, so below," that the heavens above are reflected in this world below, however imperfectly. There are correspondences between above and below. And the current of Hermeticism is about, you could say, maybe I'm being a bit sloppy, looking at the correspondences to see the glory of God. But having made that statement, I think I need to bring in something else that is going to be relevant here. The kinds of things that Tomberg is speaking about in terms of Hermeticism involve not simply, the glory of God in the world, but also understanding what ails the world, what is ill in the world, what very, very deep processes in the world that aren't necessarily going to be produced by, empiricism or rationalism. The insights are not going to be yielded through our, the kinds of empirical and rational processes that have become so important to us over just the last 3 or 4 centuries. People like Tomberg, Hermeticists like Tomberg and Morello, would say no. These kinds of empirical, rationalist, and materialist processes are more likely to obscure our vision of what is truly going on. So Hermeticism is about a search for truth, the truth of the world. Maybe I just say this as well. An argument that Sebastian Morello is making in the book, and Tomberg has made before him, is that Christianity recognized that there was tremendous value in pagans like Plato and Aristotle. And its approach to Plato and Aristotle was not to sort of throw them in the dustbin as useless, but was to baptize them, so to speak, Christianize them. And what we're about in both Sebastian Morello's book and in Tomberg's work is, can Hermeticism be baptized in the way that Plato was baptized, so to speak? Can Hermes Trismegistus be baptized? we'll be coming back. We'll be coming back to this as the episode goes on. All right, I'm conscious that there could be, Catholics, Christians listening to this, scratching their heads. Well, why do we need to baptize Hermes Trismegistus? Why do we need theologians of the world? Why aren't ordinary theologians of Scripture sufficient? Why aren't the sacraments of the Church, the greatest miracle on earth, sufficient? I mean, why do we need these things? Well, I hope this will come clearer as I proceed. But as an oblique way of throwing out something that is an oblique response to these questions right now, I'm going to throw out a couple of questions. Why is it that only now, in the 21st century, are people confused about whether they're a man or a woman or not? Okay, maybe there were cases before the 21st century, but it's now a mass phenomenon. Is it simply because mass media is, promoting this everywhere, and simply because, we can now, pump our bodies full of testosterone or estrogen or whatever, and operate and mutilate ourselves? Why now? Can that sufficiently be explained simply by new technology? I'm going to throw out another question. Why was it that it was only really in the beginning, and this is relevant to everywhere we're going in this episode. It's relevant to Sebastian Morello's book, it's relevant to Tomberg. Why was it that it was only at the beginning of the 16th century, that 1500s, that people en masse in the West began to question for the first time whether the Eucharist was truly his body and his blood, or whether it was only a symbol? Why was it only in the beginning of the 1500s that people en masse began to think, well, this might only be a symbol? And virtually no Christians before that had ever thought this before. Why did it only occur there? Well, you can come up with certain things. You can certainly think about, the printing press and, all kinds of things. Spreading, new ways of thinking, so on and so forth. What Hermeticists would say, like Tomberg, and I would say also Rudolf Steiner before him, we may say more about Steiner, is that these answers aren't deep enough. They're too superficial. Answers to huge world problems like that can't be answered through empiricist or rationalist inquiry. We need ways of looking deeper. And what Valentin Tomberg would be saying would be that Hermeticism is a way of looking deeper into very deep questions about what is really going on. Or similarly, the great revolutions, whether it's like 1789 in France, but also before it, 1688 in England or 1649, these great revolutions that destroyed the old order. Why did they only happen then? Why did this destruction of hierarchy only start happening in the 17th century? Tomberg is all about peering into very deep questions like that, because in the immense materialism that we face today, and which Sebastian Morello is arguing quite correctly, I think is not only killing us, but is now really threatening the Church, we have to go back deeper. One of the threads that I think is very important among all kinds of gold in Sebastian Morello's book. But, there are many traditionalists, Catholic traditionalists, who will simply fault Vatican II. They will simply say, all our problems just go back to Vatican II, and before that we were all right. Something that certain traditionalists reading Sebastian Morello's book will be surprised to find is that Sebastian Morello is looking at the roots of Vatican II long, long before Vatican II, going back centuries, in fact. And it's all to do with how did a modern mind emerge which became doubting and skeptical and empirical and rationalist, and excluding the supernatural. And so the supernatural began to be excluded in Protestantism. Protestantism began to think of the sacraments as only symbols. And then pretty soon, by the 19th century, and I'm putting this all a little bit sloppily, for reasons I've stated, by the 19th century, you had liberal Protestantism, and it was beginning to declare that, miracles were impossible. People like Rudolf Bultmann, very influential liberal Protestant of the early 20th century, arguing to demythologize Christianity. All this, begins emerging in the 19th century, but it has roots back before that. Protestantism began with this skepticism of the supernatural nature of the sacraments. Morello's really amazing, dazzling roller coaster of a book, although it covers a lot of territory and it covers it very quickly, is going into these deeper questions, looking at the problem of the church, in a deeper way. So here you have at Vatican II, you have liberal theologians, beginning to emerge, people like Karl Rahner, running around, Vatican II and being a bit sloppy here, but, really arguing that we have to get rid of the Virgin Mary, out of ecumenical sensitivity to Protestants. I am being a bit sloppy here, but, one of the things, for example, that, and we can't spend time on it now, but one of the many things Sebastian Morello is doing in the book is looking at how Karl Rahner, this liberal Catholic, who, with a number of other people like, Hans Küng and Schillebeeckx and other people were so influential at Vatican II, how did they become this way? How did they become this way? Sebastian Morello is asking very deep questions in this very special book, just like Valentin Tomberg was asking very deep questions about, you could say, the soul of the world. What ails the soul of the world? I'll just speak about Tomberg now, as I've been with him for 27 years, because I've been with Tomberg's thinking for 27 years, and I've only been with Sebastian Morello's thinking for 9 or 10 weeks now. What became obvious to me as I spent time with Tomberg is that he was not satisfied with answers that were simplistic. So we have, from the blurb on the back of Sebastian's book, he speaks about a leaden blanket of rationalism, materialism, and reductionism. Tomberg was not interested in rationalist answers. He was not interested in materialist answers. He was not interested in reductionist answers. He was looking for deep, deep things to understand what was, you could say, figuratively, what was ailing the soul of the world. Why is the soul of the world becoming sick with materialism? He speaks about this in Meditations on the Tarot, that all these revolutions, including the scientific revolution, are drying up, turning the West, the soul of the West, into like a desert. And why is this happening?
Hello everybody, we're back now because I'm awake and we're both sitting together. And yes, we are here on this very tragic day for the world, with what's happening now with Israel and Iran added to everything else. So it's a solemn day to be here back with you, and the final day of Eastertide, Pentecost Saturday. And Roger and I prayed our last Regina Caeli at midday, and it always saddens me to move forward from Eastertide, because it's such a joyous time of the year, and I think the Regina Caeli is my favourite Marian antiphon, so I'm always sad to see it go. But we move forward to the Feast of the Holy Trinity tomorrow, and then forward to Corpus Christi and the Feast of the Sacred Heart, so the Great Novena to the Sacred Heart. But we put that aside, and I just want to say, before we get back to the things we were talking about yesterday, please take a look at our Substack. There are posts going up, notes going up every day, and you wanted to just say something about that.
Yes, I'll just say it again to people. We do have a Substack now. We have a Buy Me a Coffee. Please look at the links down below there, because we are appealing for your support. I'll just say that the Substack, there's free subscriptions at the moment. At some point, probably soon, we'll be putting on the paid. But nearly all the content there, will remain free. There will not be a paywall on most of it. So we hope that some of you will be subscribing for the free subscription, and we hope you'll be getting something good there. And yes, Kim, we're not only just doing the posts. I just did a big post up at Substack. Well, it's not that big actually. Big in seriousness, maybe not in size, on Eastern occultism without Christ, the New Age replacement of Christianity. As I say, those issues are really going on for me powerfully right now. So, but we're also putting up the notes there daily. We're active in the kind of Substack social media section, and that's another way of, joining us if you want to join us there. We're really throwing ourselves into Substack. But that's enough of that. I think it's like we just want to, before moving on with more things that we want to say about Tomberg, I think we just want to deal with certain things that we said yesterday. And I think I just have one more thing. I don't want to just keep going on and on about this, unfortunate way that Thomas Meares has misheard Sebastian Morello, and the way that Sebastian Morello appears to have misheard me. I don't want to excavate all of that. But I think I just want to say something. It is necessary for me to speak about it. In that kind of unfortunate chain of Chinese whispers, people might get the impression that, what I've just been saying about Tomberg yesterday, that I do believe that he's a saint, working with certain, with people across the world, does not mean that I think that he's necessarily in any, in my life or in anybody's life on a sort of daily basis or anything remotely like that. And one could pick up that impression. I hardly know how to speak about this. It's like many, many years ago, and I'm not going into it now. I had experiences in Paray-le-Monial. I could not shake the idea that maybe, I can't say, that he was present in some way. And I've had dreams, and I've had people come to me and tell me not just any old dream, but dreams that changed their life. I actually met a woman who also very much felt, she's deceased now, but I don't think she'll mind my saying this, that a life-changing dream from Tomberg helped her to throw off anthroposophy and a kind of anthroposophical network she was involved with. She was a French woman.
And come to the church. Yes, exactly. So I guess that was part of my journey as well. I saw that other people were having these dreams. So yes, this French woman, that we met in France, she had this life-changing dream with Tomberg, and she said that it was actually led her to the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. Throwing off this kind of anthroposophical network that she was involved with. So that's part of the uncanny mix here I have, love, that, I have these experiences, I have these dreams. This may just sound really, round the bend to people. But then I meet other people, and good people I respect, people I see having the same experience, and some of them are just really extraordinary things, life-changing things. But these things for me are sort of like few and far between, and I have to wrestle with them. Is it really real? And after wrestling with it, I do think that some of these things are. And when I met Sebastian, as I said, I was kind of blown away by his book. I was blown away by it because it even if I don't agree with everything in it, it's so acute, and I feel it's so relevant to certain terribly materialistic things the world is facing, the church is facing, and I couldn't help feeling how Tombergian it was,
how Tombergian it was. It almost uncanny in certain ways, because I could see that, I've been with, Tomberg for the last 27 years or something like that, 28 years, but, compared to me, Sebastian Morello is relatively fresh to Tomberg. And, I couldn't help feeling, is Tomberg somehow inspiring Sebastian in some way? Like, I have met other people across the planet, this French woman I mentioned, feeling that Tomberg really intervened in their lives, or Mikhail French, talking to me and sharing with me, about how he felt Tomberg had done so much in his life. So this is a kind of experience that certain people are having across the world. In my view, they're people that I respect deeply. But that doesn't mean that I think that, I have no idea. I have no idea. The experiences I'm referring to are many years ago now. And yes, I do somehow imagine that this is a saint who cares about us, loves us, but I have to struggle with these things. I have no idea,
Yes, and I see you struggle day in, day out, not just with these things, but with everything, because you're somebody who is very thorough, and it makes you very slow, because you need to have arrived at some sort of conviction through your struggling with different sides of things. So you're not somebody who would just say, this is like this. You would say, maybe this is like this.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
I wonder.
Yes.
Or
yes,
I
yes,
think
yes.
it might be.
Yes.
So,
In fact, I'll just say this. If anyone were ever to have the tortuous task of reading my private journals, the one word that they would probably find in there more than anything else was maybe. And that's just a little joke between me and myself, well, now the rest of the world. But maybe is almost like my favorite word.
There's SLT.
Oh, yeah, you've had them.
SLT.
We won't.
Something like this.
Yeah, because I can't precisely, because you sometimes see my private journals, but I can't pin things down very easily.
And that's how I saw you wrestling with Belloc again, as we said before. And yes, is what Belloc's saying right? Is what I saw you wrestle. I see you wrestle with everything. And I'm saying this because you couldn't have said those things about Sebastian in the way that they've been put out there.
Yeah, thank you, Ken.
And
thank you.
I just want to correct something that I said about Belloc before. I haven't felt right saying that he's a little genius, because I think he's a great genius. What I've read of him has deeply moved, impressed. The way he captures history and characters. It's almost as though he's there, and you can smell it, and you can feel the place, or you can feel or see the person he's describing. It's uncanny.
Yes.
So I just want to say that, but very different to Tomberg. And
I really want to jump in. Can I just jump in?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't quite know you were going to go into that about how vividly Belloc writes and how you can see and feel and smell. But I'm going to say something. I am now convinced that Belloc is a Hermeticist in the way that we are speaking about. Belloc is a Hermeticist because what we are speaking about are ways of perceiving reality more deeply, imagining the world. Belloc has this tremendous imagination, and I do not mean by imagination that he can sort of start creating Disney cartoons. People think what the imagination means is, coming up with crazy fantasies. No. When Belloc writes, let's say he writes about Oliver Cromwell, he is imagining what it was really like to be Oliver Cromwell.
It's like a fertile, creative mind.
Penetrating, yes.
Coming into action.
Yes.
And being given out to the world through words or pictures.
Yes.
or music.
And Hermeticism is all about the imagination in this sense. And if you take the time to be with, Sebastian Morello's book, and you don't sort of write it off, or you listen to, Michael Martin's, really quite profound books, even though I disagree on certain things, you will get more of a sense of the Hermetic imagination. And that's what we're speaking about in terms of Hermeticism. But anyway, your real point is that you felt you were almost like putting Belloc down, and you didn't mean to. You just see that no matter how, and in fact, I'll just say this, we're going all over the place, but it's been a deep joy for me, Kim, in the last years, because I never thought you'd start reading Belloc. I never thought you'd get into him, but you've been reading him, and you are seeing aspects to him that I didn't see. And so we now share this joy of Belloc between us. But even though we both love Belloc, and I love Belloc with all my heart, there's no question for me that Belloc was not a saint or a vast, vast mind and spirit and genius like Tomberg, and I honour Belloc with all my heart and all my being.
Now, before we began again today, you played me something of the extract that you took from the episode number what?
45.
Episode number 45, where you are talking about Sebastian's book. And I've heard it before. I was impressed before. I heard it again, and I was doubly impressed. It's an excellent piece that you've made there, and it goes to the heart of what Hermeticism is, and how you recognize it in Sebastian's book, and how you recognize how Sebastian's book is Tombergian in nature. But that extract will help people to understand what Hermeticism actually is, because this, I imagine, is a huge part of the problem with the misconceptions and the misunderstandings that are going on, that are leading to these attacks, if you like.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you have written about Hermeticism and what Hermeticism is in your big book called Jesus Sacratissimum. And I think it would help the listeners to hear something from that.
Yeah, well, what I had in mind, love, is not from Cor Jesus Sacratissimum, but no, what I was thinking we'd do is that I have a short passage here, and I read this in episode 45 as well, but I think it's maybe worthwhile reading again, because it's like there are so many misconceptions here. Again, as Sebastian writes, it's an elastic term that can take in all kinds of strange things that is not at all what Tomberg meant by Christian Hermeticism.
So where's this passage from?
Well, this is from something I'm working on, and hopefully before I die I'll get it finished. But it's going to be a book about Tomberg, and probably it's going to be a book that's taking in some of Morello's thought and Michael Martin's thought and people like that. But yeah, things take me. I'm very, very, very slow. I wish I weren't. But anyway, we will just read this passage.
Thorough.
Yes, thank you, love. Thank you. I can't bear some of the kind of very sloppy things, going on. Anyway, so, okay. We're going to read this. And more or less, I'm saying that, what Tomberg was concerned with in what he means Christian Hermeticism is he was concerned with concentrated ways of seeing the world and listening to the world that utilitarian rationalists obsessed with quantities and measurements close their mind to. We are now, I'll just riff on this, we are now so obsessed with data, mechanical understandings. This is what's happened to modernity. Tomberg is speaking about how do we recover this. This is what Sebastian Morello's book is about. How do we recover this?
Yes, I just want to say something here. I was utterly shocked when you began telling me about your schooling when you were young in Oregon in the USA.
Yeah.
Of how you were given questions that were multiple choice.
Yeah, or even true or false.
Or yes
yeah, just
or
binary.
no.
Yes or no, true or false, yeah.
I was stunned.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, years later, I saw how a child brought home her homework.
Yeah.
And she had the same things.
Yeah, in Europe. You've never seen this before
Ireland,
in Europe. Yeah, you've never seen this before.
From the south.
Yeah. This American way of education.
We were living in County Wicklow.
Yeah.
And she had a number of books, textbooks, that were like colouring books.
Yeah.
And one for each subject.
Yeah.
And I just could not believe it.
Yeah.
How simplified, how dumbed down. I'd never seen anything like this. And then what does a child's brain, how does a child's brain shape when all it has is yes, no, or, true, false,
or A, B, C, D.
Yes, or these cartoony images to colour in for all the different subjects.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Yeah. It's horrifying the way education is going. And I'll just say this very quickly. I think one of my favourite episodes on this whole channel I actually went into this kind of American education I grew up with, true, false, Columbus discovered America in 1492, 1517, this kind of education that is just fill in the blanks. I think it's episode 40 or 41. I can't quite remember the title, but it's about Tomberg and the machine. And I've taken this from Michael Martin, actually, who I think has taken it from Paul Kingsnorth, about talking about modernity as the machine. I want to say that I like episode 40, 41. I like it a lot, on Tomberg and the machine.
But what I'm trying to say, how much I was shocked, horrified by it.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is, it's the complete and utter opposite of enchantment.
Yeah.
Of seeing the glory of God in everything.
Yeah.
It's limiting a child's brain to something artificial, non-imaginative, non-thinking.
Yes.
You become a parrot.
Yes, indeed. It's a global tragedy, and I'll just continue reading my quote because this is all to do with this. Both Tomberg and Morello are asking, how can we get away from this mechanical education, this modern mechanical mind? And the answer has a lot to do with meditation. Meditation. So just to continue, I just read this bit from, this work in progress. I point out that, of course, Tomberg's magnum opus has, after all, everything to do with meditation. Whether this involves contemplating symbols, contemplating the sacred liturgy of the Church, contemplating Holy Scripture, or our dreams, other subtle forms of experience, or simply listening, really deeply listening to the loved ones and everyday folk that divine providence no doubt brings to us for a purpose. Providence also brings events. Why has God brought this into my life? Asking this, making it a question, contemplating it. Providence also brings events, graces, and misfortunes that unexpectedly steal into our lives. Listen to these. They too are part of the world. What is revealed if we carefully contemplate their meaning? Might angels minister to us? Carefully contemplate too God's glory in the sun, the stars, the moon, mountains, and oceans, and do not forget the tiny flowers by the wayside. The world is profound. Attend to its profundity. Make a discipline of this. This is what Hermeticism is. It is disciplined attention to these things. Yes. Why did I dream this? Why did this happen to me? What is revealed by this tiny flower on the wayside? I'll stay with my quote from my book. Given practice, disciplined practice, our hearts and minds can recover the vision medieval man naturally possessed before we moderns, so-called quote-unquote, found out better. We found out how to make all these modern mechanical monsters, and we forgot the Eucharist. Given practice, regular, sustained, methodical practice of the sort I just described, we attain heightened sensitivity to the world. It is a world which, no doubt, waits for our love. Make sure, then, that moral striving to serve God and the world fills your practice. If you do this, you will have arrived at Tomberg's own understanding of Hermeticism, Christian Hermeticism, at least in its ideal essence. This is what Tomberg is saying about Hermeticism, and what I'm going to say now, you may want to say things, is I'm still with the whole question, love, of people saying, well, why do we need this? Why do we need this? Surely the church is enough. And I want to say, Tomberg actually says this. He says the church is enough. All you need for your salvation, is the church. He is not encouraging everyone in this world to be a Hermeticist, but he is encouraging some of us to follow this Hermetic path so that we can wrestle with these things. We can wrestle with why has the world become like this? To understand what happened to the world that we now have lost the Eucharist. There's no, you can't just explain it by printing presses and things like that. I think that was it's something deeper, wounding the soul of the world. And he's saying we need to contemplate these things, but this is not a replacement. This is not a replacement, for our salvation through the sacraments of the church.
Something you said to me recently, or I saw, or both, was the high proportion of priests today who no longer believe that the Eucharist becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity, which is everything of Jesus Christ.
Yes, it's reached shocking levels. I think in places like America especially, I don't think the levels would be so high here in Ireland, or places like Poland or Portugal, but it's reached shocking levels in the kind of America that I grew up in, where everything was like true or false, or in multiple choice, A, B, C, D. This kind of mechanical, education that Americans like myself got. Huge topic. Yeah, we better not get me going on that again.
So let's just come back to something you said, that Tomberg is not saying that Hermeticism is something to replace the church.
Not at all.
No. He's saying Hermeticism needs to be within the church.
Absolutely.
And there's something very moving that he wrote in a form of a confession.
Yeah.
That I would like to read.
Yeah, because I think it really speaks to his humility before the church. And maybe just before you read this incredibly moving passage, Kim, I'll say this: when I was in Germany, living, just a mile down the road from Michael French, Michael, in all his, studies of Tomberg, and he's writing the biography and all of this, he said to me that the passage you're about to read, Kim, is one of the most key passages in Meditations on the Tarot, and he considered this passage you're about to read, of particular importance in Tomberg really sharing his soul with the world, that he really had come to see in all his years with Meditations on the Tarot, that this passage you're about to read was a very key passage of incredible personal importance for Tomberg.
That revealed something very deep of his pure nature.
Yes.
As a person.
Yes, that's how Michael considered it.
Monsieur Priest, pardon me concerning what you think to be human pride, which wants to penetrate into the mysteries of God, instead of bowing before divine wisdom and goodness, and accepting with humility, as befits a Christian, the revealed truths of salvation, which, in so far as they are practiced, suffice absolutely for the well-being, happiness, and salvation of the soul.
I feel like jumping in there and say, he's saying these suffice absolutely for the salvation of the soul. The sacraments of the church are the greatest thing of all. I'm sorry if I'm being a bit didactic there, but I'm just jumping in and saying that.
So I will continue. I say this to you now as if at confession. I am unable not to aspire to the depth, the height, and the breadth of comprehensive truth, of comprehension of the totality of things. I have made the sacrifice of the intellect, sacrificium intellectus, in all sincerity and without reserve. But what an intensification of the life of thought, what increased ardour in the aspiration to spiritual knowledge that has followed. I know that the truths of salvation, revealed and transmitted by the counsel of the Holy Church, are both necessary and sufficient for salvation, and I have no doubt whatever that they are true, and I strive to do my best to practice them. But I am unable to arrest the current of the river of thought, which bears me towards mysteries that perhaps are meant only for saints, perhaps only for angels, in any case, that I know without doubt are reserved for beings more worthy than me. Father, will you grant me absolution?
It's very moving, the humility in this, and I didn't know I was going to say this, but I guess I want to riff on this slightly, Kim, because I didn't know this was going to come in, and we want to get to other things in this episode, but just give me a moment to say this. I said at the beginning of this episode that, one of the reasons that I wasn't getting into this kind of, I said sound and fury on the internet. Maybe I'm belittling it that way, I don't know. But one of the reasons is that I had other problems that I needed to attend to. One was the New Age replacement of Christianity, but the other, and this is what this episode was originally going to be about, was how people are holding on to Tomberg's anthroposophy. How, there's a manuscript that's never been published that he actually wanted burned, an anthroposophical manuscript. We're not going to go into this in this episode, but it's like this kind of passage shows something completely different from the spirit of anthroposophy. And I am just going to labor this a bit. I know the truths of salvation, revealed and transmitted by the counsel of the Holy Church, are both necessary and sufficient for salvation. Rudolf Steiner did not believe this, The kind of esoteric Christianity, the anthroposophy Tomberg came out of, we're in a completely different universe. We're in a humble universe where he's saying that this is higher than anything I have to offer you.
Yeah.
It's very humble. I have no doubt whatever that they are true, and I strive to do my best to practice them. There's so much we could go into, but your point, Kim, that I think you said at the beginning, is that Tomberg saw Hermeticism within Christian Hermeticism within the church, and he spends his whole book is about do not do Hermeticism outside the church. Yes. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'm saying it with a bit of passion now. But Hermeticism should not be practiced outside the church. And he has line after line after line in the book about how Hermeticists are trying to compete with the church, how they're trying to rival the church, how they're trying to set up altar against altar. This was one of the things that I was thinking of going into. We're not going to go into it now. But this attempt to set up, small churches, set up altar against altar, the whole book is a warning to Hermeticists. Do not do Hermeticism outside the church, outside the discipline of the church. And he means, ladies and gentlemen, he means the Catholic Church and, yes, the Orthodox Church of the Sacraments. He's actually, I've said this again and again on the episodes, when you really dig down deep into this, although he's a very, very gentle soul, he's quite severe about Protestantism. He's severe about Luther. He's severe about Calvin. He's severe about the whole Protestant trajectory. He means, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, where the sacraments are, where priests are. And I'm getting pretty passionate. You have read this humble passage. I've got too much coffee in me again.
I haven't.
And you haven't. And you haven't. This very humble passage of submitting to the Holy Church. It's very key if you really want to understand what Tomberg is about and what the Christian Hermeticism that he envisaged is really about. And I think that's why, Michael French, really spoke to me about how this passage was so personally important to Tomberg.
And after being with all this beauty, this humility, and speaking about how Tomberg saw that if you practice Hermeticism, it needs to be practiced within the church. Saying all that and being with all that, being with the purity and the vastness of Tomberg's thinking and his being, if you like, there's something... No, I'm going to put it like this. When I read the tarot book, when we were in Germany, and I read it right through, so it's the only time in my life I've read it completely through. I've dipped into parts of it again and again and again and again and again. But this time I read it right through, and since too, on my dippings, significant dippings, not just here and there. There's a lot in the book that I really don't understand and seems quite strange and peculiar to me. And I imagine that may be the case for other people. There will be certain parts of it that we really relate to and speak to us, and then other parts that don't. And there's one thing in particular that is hugely problematic in Tomberg's writings, and it's that he states something about believing in reincarnation. So yes, this is an enormous problem for us and for all Catholics for whom reincarnation is an outright heresy. So I think it's important that we at least note this.
Yeah. Yes, I want to say this here. I've been saying from the beginning in these videos that nearly all the strange material in Tomberg, and I do believe this, nearly all that creates problems is to do with linguistics, or it's to do with terminology. It's to do with the fact that he is writing for this Hermetic audience. But I have said from the very first episode, not all of it is. That, there are problems here. And sometimes people come to me and ask me to solve the problem, and I can't. All I can say here is that the way he speaks about this, I'm going to just throw some elements into the pot here, and they do not solve the problem, ladies and gentlemen. They do not solve the problem. But he is in no way saying that the church should teach reincarnation. He is in no way saying that. In fact, he says the church is right not to teach it. He says this teaching is dangerous. And yet, he is speaking about it in a very strange way. He speaks about reincarnation, at least for certain people, not all people, having a certain reality, but not being true. Huge, strange, problematic things here that we're not going to solve. We're not going to solve in this episode, and I'm beyond solving them. This is really too much to go into. It is obviously completely problematic, but I'm going to offer this last image. Just because Tomberg has these problematic things, as very small parts of the book, does that mean that we should throw out the whole book? Does that mean that he wasn't a saint? He wasn't holy? Well, anyone is free to come to their conclusion. I'm not trying to canonize Tomberg. I'm telling you that in my opinion, he was a saint. He was holy. He was filled with moral genius. One little analogy I have, it's a very limited and partial analogy, but analogies are necessarily limited and partial, is that it's often said that St. Augustine never managed to throw off his Manichaean spots. So St. Augustine had been a Manichaean. He'd been a heretic, before, converting to the church. In a certain way, Tomberg had been an anthroposophist, and he converted to Catholicism. But just like people, they speak about St. Augustine and they see some of the things he said about predestination, and they say he's still being Manichaean. Tomberg, very limited, partial analogy there, but St. Augustine was a great saint. Tomberg, I believe, was a great saint. You don't have to believe that. So, we need to speak about this. As I say, I've been saying from the beginning that there are truly, genuinely problematic aspects of the book. I'm not trying to deny that, but I'm not going to be able to solve them for you. All I can say is that they do not take away from my belief in his holiness and in his genius.
Exactly. So what do we do? Do we throw the book away? We can't. There's too much there.
Yeah.
This man is so good and moral.
Yeah. Maybe I could say something there, love. Yes, as you say. There's not only too much there to throw this away, but there's too much there that is relevant to some of the most pressing world problems. Another thing that I've been saying throughout this episode is the occult replacement of Christianity. He liberated me from this. He's liberating all kinds of people, from the sort of New Age. He was aware, I think this is stuff that we're going to go into in another episode. Well, I actually have been into this before, but he was very aware of the growing New Age movement, and in my opinion, this book was really written. I keep saying it has 100 books in one, but one of those books, or maybe several of them, are all about liberation from New Age thinking. And this book, I consider the New Age to be a major world problem, and this book is helping people. So that's just one example of why there's too much in the book. There's far more in the book. There's just too much love, too much sincerity, too much beauty, too much reverence for Christ and his church, pointing people to the church. There's just too much. Alright, it's the next day now, and again we're going to be departing from the norm because Kim is not with me. She was actually just sitting down with me not 20 minutes, half an hour ago, and she said she just felt not well enough. But I had all prepped this final part, trying to wrap this up in the next, I don't know, better not predict, but this is the final section, I believe. And I had all prepped this. Yeah, I had my coffee. And I've decided to go ahead and try to finish this myself, because we need to turn these episodes around faster, and maybe this one particularly. I will just say that as we go into this final section, there are just two more themes here to cover. I'm going to start with the shorter one, and in a sense it's really just a reiteration, but I want to say a little bit more. Some people think that I am overwrought, worried, melodramatic, in the emphasis that I keep saying in my kind of foreboding, and it is a foreboding, that Tomberg's, wish to deeply leave his anthroposophical work behind is not being heeded. And I put out a lot of effort in these videos, actually behind the scenes as well, because I am seeing all kinds of problems emerging from trying to sort of say that Tomberg was, holding on to all this anthroposophical stuff when he went to such lengths to distance himself from it. I've said this before, but we'll mention it again. There's a letter from 67, I think it is, where he says that what he was trying to do with anthroposophy in his 30s was akin to Julian the Apostate. And Julian the Apostate was the Roman emperor who tried to revert the Roman Empire back to paganism. So you see again and again in both his private correspondence and in the book this attempt to separate himself from this. In fact, right at the very beginning of the book, very first paragraph of the book, he says something like this effect: "You will understand me better You will understand me better, dear unknown friend, if, from this book, more than any other source you have, and I think even then he was concerned when he wrote that people would be interpreting him through, the sources that he rejected. I keep laboring this. There are things that I want to go into. There are things I want to go into more about why I see serious consequences the fallout from this. But I think all I'll say now, I want to hit this note again, that Tomberg was pleading for a Christian Hermeticism within the church. And he goes out of his way again and again and again to say that the Christian Hermeticism he's speaking about has nothing to do with, trying to do this outside the church. And then what I really believe is going on is that there are people questioning, well, what does he mean by the church? Surely he means some sort of universal church. There's a biography out there written by an anthroposophist, Harry Salmon. We're not going to go into that much today. I consider this biography tremendously problematic. It's called Valentin Tomberg and the Ecclesia Universalis, Universal Church. And he is trying to create a Tomberg. He's trying to create a Tomberg that isn't, a Catholic convert. And he's an anthroposophist. It's very, very clear. It's very clear in the book that his loyalties are to anthroposophy. And indeed, wherever Tomberg deviates from anthroposophy, in my view, anyway, you need to read the book and judge for yourself. He tries to give kind of psychological motives. Tomberg is kind of psychologized. Well, it was maybe, he really does sort of even suggest or intimate, fear in various places, like Tomberg should have stayed an anthroposophist. This is a kind of subtext, in my view, to the book, but we can't go into that right now. But it's weighing on me. Things to do with this are weighing on me, and I mean to speak about them another time. But, what Harry Salmon doesn't do in his book, is that he doesn't deal with all the statements in Tomberg's late works dealing with the church. And in fact, the church as the Catholic Church, not as some kind of woolly Ecclesia Universalis transcending all churches or things like that. There are statement after statement after statement. In fact, maybe even I'm slightly in error here. I mean, I don't think I am really. But earlier in this episode, I spoke about Tomberg meaning by the church, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. But really, if you parse Tomberg carefully on the Orthodox Church, he is saying the Orthodox churches of the East don't have the fullness of the church. And his writings are filled with statements like this. Well, filled, that's a bit strong. Let's just be, but there are many through the text and through his letters. But here is one. The Catholic Church, being Catholic or universal, cannot consider itself as a particular church among other particular churches, nor consider its dogmas as religious opinions among other religious opinions or confessions. And I think this is very important in this whole thing, where Tomberg is saying this very uncomfortable and difficult thing for Hermeticists and anthroposophists, saying don't do this stuff outside the church. You can sort of get around it and say, oh, well, maybe he means some sort of vague, woolly, universal church. But if you read him carefully and you have to really, face what he's saying, then you have to deal with many, many statements like that in the book. And if anyone can find Harry Salmon or other people really engaging and dealing with those kinds of statements, I'd like to hear about it, because in my view, these people, for all their good intentions, are not facing or confronting the kind of statements I just made there. And there's a lot more that could be said, but we need to move on. But I'm doing this, ladies and gentlemen, for reasons that I think ultimately, this is my own belief, have to do with my conscience. I'm making these actions over years, in front of the camera, behind the scenes, based on reasons that I dare to believe are to do with my conscience. I don't think I'm overwrought or melodramatic. I think serious things are flowing from this. But look, we need to move on. It does weigh on me. Okay. It's not impossible, I'll come back to this, but I want to now deal with the main last thing that I want to speak about in this episode. Really, what this episode has turned out to be, in the 3 days that Kim and I have been recording it, and I've been editing it and things like that, is sort of raising this question: is Valentin Tomberg a saint? And I've said very much that I don't wish to, convince anyone that he is. This decision is for the church. One of these decades or one of these centuries. It's not for me. But the more I've gone on over the last 3 days, the more it's actually felt in my prayer that not only do I need to say, this is how I feel about him. And I've had these stories of what appear to be his interventions in people's dreams and in real life. In fact, there's a miracle story that I'm not going to tell you right now. But maybe I just say this. A group of people in a European country helped me in a very profound crisis that I was in. Really, you could say they rescued Kim and me. And one of the people there very much felt that he had experienced Valentin Tomberg asking him to do this. So who knows the truth of that story? All I can say is that these people didn't act lightly. They really sacrificed a lot, and it's a certain miracle that's in my life. And maybe I just bring another thing in the subject of miracles right here, and I can't remember it all that well, but we've been speaking about Martin Kreile in these episodes, who was more well known in Germany than he is now, but he was also a close friend, very close friend indeed, to Robert Spemann, and we're going to be coming to Robert Spemann as we go into this final section. Robert Spemann is more well known in the English-speaking world, particularly Latin Mass circles, because he was a great defender of the Latin Mass, and we're going to come back to Robert Spemann. But Martin Kreile is the man that Tomberg gave his literary estate to. Tomberg thought of him as his second son, so Tomberg had one biological son, but he spoke about Martin Kreile as his second son. You can read about this in the German biography. And maybe it's in the Harry Salmon as well. I can't remember. The very, in my view, flawed Harry Salmon book. It does pain me. I know these people mean well. I know they mean well. But anyway, I do think the book is flawed, and it has to be said. I think it really has to be said. Anyway, I know that Martin Kreile also has a kind of miracle story about Tomberg, although this was while Tomberg was still alive, and I don't remember all the ins and outs of it. And my German now is so rusty that I couldn't read it properly. But in essence, Kreile had a son or a child who was born in the hospital, and the child was basically told the child, if I recall correctly, had no chance of living. And he turned to Tomberg, and Tomberg went into prayer, and Tomberg suggested a remedy. And as a result of this, Kreile writes, the child is still alive today. The child lived when it's told he had no hope of living. That is how I recall the story. I'm saying all these things for a reason that I'm coming to. Well, maybe I'll say it right now. Yeah, this is all about the issue I'm raising. Is Tomberg a saint? I think it's going to be the title of the episode. I think what I'm really aware of here, ladies and gentlemen, is that I'm not speaking, and Kim is not speaking, in a vacuum here. There are all kinds of people across the planet who do think that Tomberg is some kind of saint. It's like if Kim and I just had our own private opinion that, I don't know, Joe Bloggs down the road, is a saint. That would be one thing, but it helps me to realize that we're not in a vacuum here. And yes, no, I'm going to repeat this. I told the story of the French woman who came to me and spoke about a dream, and she said it led to the toughest, most difficult thing in her life, which was sort of leaving behind an anthroposophical network. But she really came and felt that Tomberg had asked her, or had suggested to her that this is what she needed to do, and she then became very deeply committed to the church. And I saw in this French woman's story a complete parallel to my own experiences. I saw a complete parallel. So Kim and I see that other people are having, parallel experiences. We're not in a vacuum here. What I also want to say is what I gather is going on the internet right now as I speak is that I think there's a sort of quite a number of articles and I'm sure tweets and Substack things and probably on Facebook attacking, a certain number of Catholic traditionalist authors. Still haven't looked at it. At some point, I may need to do that. Some dear friend of mine is sending me a link, talking about it, intimating things like that. It is simply, I think we can say it's a fact, that Tomberg has strikingly influenced the thinking of certain Catholic traditionalist authors. Now, I doubt that many of these would agree with me that he is a saint. We all have our different takes on Tomberg, but I think it's fair to say that something about him has impressed them very deeply, because normally you would think that Tomberg, with all his strange terminology, and yes, with a few things that are genuinely problematic, this is the last thing that would speak to Catholic traditionalists. But clearly what's going on, we've spoken about Sebastian. I'm not sure, we want to go into a lot more names right now. But they can feel something about Tomberg that is very important. So again, I know I'm not in a vacuum. Kim knows she's not in a vacuum. I would dare to say that these Catholic traditionalist authors, they can feel the moral gravitas in Tomberg. Maybe they can feel the holiness. Maybe some of them think Tomberg is a saint like I do, but I'm not going to attribute that to anyone. But there are people out there in the world that just feel this tremendous moral gravitas that Tomberg has, and maybe they sense that Tomberg really has answers for the 21st century. There are people that, are very much obviously on the record about Tomberg. Obviously, Sebastian Morello's book is referencing Tomberg very, very clearly. But another person who is on the record very much about Tomberg is the Irish YouTuber Robert Nugent. I know Robert just a little. I can't imagine, Robert, if you're listening to this, you might be, that you're going to mind the fact that you are on the record with all of these videos that you have done, because I think you have been impressed by Tomberg's holiness. I'm not sure if you've ever described Tomberg as holy, but it's clear from all the videos that you have done about Tomberg that you feel his importance. And I didn't know I was going to start speaking to you like that. I'm grateful for your videos here in Ireland, and of course, you've got something like 50,000 YouTube subscribers. You're speaking to Catholics all over the world. So there are all these kinds of figures around me who are impressed with Tomberg. We may have all kinds of different views about Tomberg, but again, the point is that I'm not speaking from a vacuum. But in the final part of this episode, I want to turn my attention to very different people than, YouTubers or, Sebastian Morello. There are indeed kinds of links that Tomberg may have had. I'm not claiming this. A certain kind of influence, at the highest echelons of the church. And I'm speaking here about St. John Paul II. I'm speaking here about Pope Benedict XVI and another cardinal-elect who I will come to. It's just circumstantial evidence, admittedly, but it gives me pause to think, and maybe it's worth reporting it. No clear-cut case is going to be made here. So the way I'm going to begin going into this is to turn our attention back to Martin Kriele, Tomberg's second son, and Robert Spemann, German philosopher. Both of these figures far more well known in the German-speaking world. So they're both close friends, Martin Kriele and Robert Spemann. And Robert Spemann was also a real friend to Joseph Ratzinger. In fact, one of Joseph Ratzinger's books is dedicated to Robert Spemann, so that is quite a tribute. If you dedicate a book to someone, that means something. He dedicated one of his books to Robert Spemann. Spemann was very clearly trying to defend the Latin Mass, and Robert Spemann also wrote, is it the foreword, is it the afterword? I can't remember right now, and I'm doing this all a little bit more sloppily than I would like. But certainly forward or afterward to the German edition of Meditations on the Tarot. So you have this close friend that Benedict Pope Ratzinger admires. Ratzinger admires Robert Spemann, and Robert Spemann is trying definitely to promote Tomberg's magnum opus, Meditations on the Tarot. In fact, I think that I can say now that I know from Michael French, Dr. Michael French, who we've mentioned in these episodes, who I knew in Germany when I lived there, for a couple of years, and Michael did so much to help also free me from, the kind of New Age chains that I was in. I'm going to give him another tribute. He's one of the most deeply moving souls I have ever met. And again, I don't agree with him with everything, but we're not going to go into that right now. A deeply profound and Christian thinker. I don't know how close Michael French was to Robert Spemann, but he certainly knew him. He went to see him several times a year, as I recall. I think he went to a group that Robert Spemann was running. Certainly Robert Spemann, he valued Robert Spemann, and I believe vice versa. Well, Michael told me that it was Robert Spemann who had personally given St. John Paul II the gift of the German edition of Meditations on the Tarot, which is a 2-volume edition. And there's a photo out there on the internet with St. John Paul II with Meditations on the Tarot in its 2-volume German edition. I recognize this very well because I lived in Germany and I know what the 2-volume German edition looks like. It's clearly, and this has been around long before, Photoshop and doctoring things and things like that. Now, the fact that St. John Paul II had it on his desk doesn't really mean much. The fact that he accepted it as a gift from Robert Spemann, maybe that does mean something. But in terms of St. John Paul II, there is another link as well. And for some people, this will be quite a controversial link. But in 1987, I believe I'm right in saying, St. John Paul II made Hans Urs von Balthasar a cardinal. He elected him as a cardinal of the church. Now, Hans Urs von Balthasar died before he could become a cardinal, but he was certainly a cardinal-elect. This is someone that St. John Paul II chose to be at the highest echelons of the church, and, I'm not going to deny that St. John Paul II made, Bergoglio at the highest levels of the church. This is not meant to be, defending Tomberg on the basis of this, and I know that I really know very little about Hans Urs von Balthasar. What I do know, and maybe it's worth saying, that at the time that St. John Paul II nominated this theologian, to be a cardinal, and this was in the era, when the theology of Karl Rahner and, Hans Küng and Sheila Beeks, and, we mentioned these earlier, I believe, liberal theology was triumphant, and I know that Hans Urs von Balthasar was the other current. He was not Küng, he was not Rahner, he was, well, I really don't know enough about him. I truly should hold my tongue. But yes, it's well known now that, in addition to Robert Spemann, writing, a preface or afterward to the German edition, Hans Urs von Balthasar did much the same thing for Meditations on the Tarot. And he described Valentin Tomberg as a thinking, praying Christian of unmistakable purity. Whatever you want to make of that, I'll let you make of it. But I would say that those phrases, a thinking, praying Christian of unmistakable purity, they capture very deeply what I think many of us feel about this man. And this, for those people, who are really, really struggling, like, what is going on? Why are these Catholic traditionalists, and why are people like me and Sebastian Morello and Robert Nugent and other people whose names I won't go into? It's because, again, maybe we feel a thinking, praying Christian of unmistakable purity. We feel the power of the thought. We feel the power of the prayer. We feel the purity. So again, I'm still speaking about this is not in a vacuum. It's not in a vacuum, what Kim and I feel. And I look to that. So, I certainly believe that when, St. John Paul, I don't know when Schmemann gave him Meditations on the Tarot. He looks fairly young. It looks like the 80s in the photo. I don't know when he gave him this, but I think that it's very likely that St. John Paul II knew that von Balthasar had written the German, foreword for Meditations on the Tarot. He knew that von Balthasar backed this book. I'm not sure there's a way to prove that, but I believe that I do believe that St. John Paul II would have been aware before he named Hans Urs von Balthasar to be a cardinal that Hans Urs von Balthasar was seeing Meditations on the Tarot in the light that he did see it. So I can't prove that, but I think you have to think about this for yourself. Look at the photo of St. John Paul II. Look how old he looks. Know that he probably got the books before that. I think that he will have known that, von Balthasar was definitely meaning to promote this book by this thinking, praying Christian of unmistakable purity. It's just something to throw in the pot and think about it. As I said, I know very little about Hans Urs von Balthasar. So I'm just throwing things out there, kind of circumstantial things, if you like, but they point to a bigger picture. They're like fragments of a puzzle. I'm throwing out jigsaw puzzle pieces, if you like, and I haven't got the whole picture here, but I throw these puzzle pieces out there, and it's for you to assemble them for yourself. You'll probably assemble them in a different way than I do, but they speak to me, and maybe they'll speak to you. So I will just continue. Yeah, I've said that Kriele and Schmemann were very close friends. Kriele goes into this very much in his memoir. And Kriele knew Ratzinger. Have I said that already? Kriele knew Ratzinger. He didn't know him. He wasn't close to him, I believe, like Robert Schmemann, I believe, was. But he does make the claim, and I believe it's in the memoir, that in speaking to Ratzinger, he makes his claim that Ratzinger had no objection to Kriele's, esoteric Christianity, so-called. I believe that's a statement in the book. I can't reference it for you, but I know that he's basically on that statement saying, he's on record saying that very much so, that in presenting all this to Ratzinger, Ratzinger did not object. And there's just other kinds of circumstantial things here. I'm going to bring in something else. Now that I've gone with all of this. It's hardly conclusive, but there is a report that Joseph Ratzinger, when he was still a cardinal, authorized the Russian edition of Meditations on the Tarot. Where does this report come from? It comes from an anthroposophist who was trying to discredit Tomberg. It comes from a Russian anthroposophist, Sergei Prokofiev. He wrote a book called The Case of Valentin Tomberg, Anthroposophy or Jesuitism, because he was horrified by Tomberg's conversion to the Catholic Church, and he was accusing him of Jesuitism, which, if you know anthroposophy, you can't be anything worse than a Jesuit. Maybe I'm being a little bit flippant there, but Rudolf Steiner was terribly, terribly, terribly critical of the Jesuits. So Prokofiev wrote this book, and it's on page 8 of the book, if you want to dig the book out. And he claims that the Russian edition of Meditations on the Tarot was authorized by Cardinal Ratzinger. I don't know what to make of that. On the one hand, I can say that Prokofiev was a Russian. Most of us do not know what was really going on in Russia, or most of us non-Russians anyway, what was going on in Russia, in the 1990s. I think that's the time he's referring to. Does he have accurate information? I don't remember that he really backed it up. I can't say. He certainly wasn't saying it, though, to try to support Tomberg. Quite the opposite. He may well have known that in terms of the Russian contacts he had, or maybe he didn't, for whatever little it's worth. Although I really, really think that this Prokofiev book is an awful book, an absolutely awful book, read it several times over the years. I do believe in the integrity of Prokofiev. I don't think he would issue at all what he considered to be a lie. So he could have been deceived, he could have misheard, or he could know. He could know that the Russian edition of Meditations on the Tarot was blessed by Cardinal Ratzinger. And this adds up in a bigger picture. If, Cardinal Ratzinger really esteems Robert Spemann, it all begins, these are just puzzle pieces. There's another puzzle piece, and it's about the loosest, the most vaguest piece of circumstantial evidence that it's almost not worth my while mentioning to you now. I'd like to bring it out another time when I've really looked into it. But 2 or 3 years ago, someone sent me, I think it was a homily maybe, it was some sort of text of Ratzinger, and he sent me it saying, "Does this not sound Tombergian?" And I had to say, my goodness, does it sound Tombergian? It was, you just take this as my own subjective impression. I can't give you anything better than that right now, and I can't dig the text up right now. I'm sure I can find it, or I can contact the man again who sent me it. But I read that and thought, there is no way. That was my impression. That was my impression that Benedict XVI has not, studied Tomberg. You take that or you leave it, but it fits as a puzzle piece. It fits into a bigger picture here. All right, back after a cup of coffee, another cup of coffee. I don't think we're going to say much more in terms of puzzle pieces about Tomberg. Indeed, this might be the last about Tomberg for a while. I know that Kim wants to do the episode about our time in Catholic France, and that certainly ties in with Tomberg. So maybe there will be some more Tomberg stuff. I'm not sure. Maybe more people will want me to comment, I don't know, on the kind of controversies going on the internet, and how much I will do that, I cannot say. I still need to read the pieces, I still need to think about it, but I have other things to do with my life, ladies and gentlemen. As I say, my focus really has been recently the New Age replacement of Christianity. There are really terrible things that are not being fought out about on the internet. I feel so few Catholics are really paying the attention they need to this. So I need to do that. And I'm also with a work for Ireland that includes the mystery of Ireland, the mystery of Ireland's roots. 1916. There's a tragedy of the Irish nation where people these days psychologize and dismiss the founders of the, Irish nation as we know it, people like Patrick Pearse, Joseph Plunkett, and I am with a need to work with their legacy, hermetically dwell with their legacy, really inquire what was going on in the souls of these people who established Irish freedom, from the British Empire. There's a profound set of things, at least I feel it's profound, that I need to be thinking of in terms of Ireland. So, am I meant to be drawn, what does God want for me? Does God want me to be drawn into these internet controversies, or have I said enough? I will just keep praying about all of this. Not a lot more to say now. Right now, I am tempted, ladies and gentlemen, to close the comments down for the first time in my life, because other people are equipped to be keyboard warriors and all kinds of things like that. As I've been saying on our new Substack, I'm equipped to be a hermit, figuratively speaking, a hermit, a recluse. That's what I'm equipped to do, and I'm really not sure that all my energy should get caught up in this when I have these other pressing things. I think they're pressing. I think they're what I'm being truly called to do. And people don't even know what I'm speaking about, when I speak about the New Age replacement of Christianity. So really, maybe my attention needs to go there. But right now, I'm inclined to leave the comments open, and any charitable comments, any comments that come from your heart, they would be particularly appreciated at this time. If you want to leave a comment, ladies and gentlemen. So I wanted to say that, And then I think the last thing I want to say, maybe almost the last thing, I do again want to speak about Substack. I'm really deeply intrigued by Substack. I think that it's really going to provide Kim and me with a set of tools to do the different kinds of work we need to do. And again, just speaking personally for anyone who's interested in these last few minutes, I think part of the problem Kim and I face is that we do have these projects, disparate projects, and different people are interested in different aspects. There are some of you I know who just want me to say more about Tomberg or want me to get the book about Tomberg done. And other people could care less, what I have to say about Tomberg, and they're far more interested, in my perceptions about Ireland. And other people, and some of these aren't even Catholics, they're Protestants. It's strangely, it often seems Protestants are more awake to the New Age, than Catholics are. I think there are Protestants out there that want me to say more about the New Age. So I'm kind of pulled in different directions with a different kind of audience. But I've said this before on the channel. I'm 62 years old this year, and I'm praying and asking God, what do you really want me to do with whatever time I have left on earth? And these projects come to the fore. There's also a project with the English Catholics like Hilaire Belloc, Evelyn Waugh. There are projects to do with Europe. Charles de Gaulle, if I ever get the time. I'm just trying to find my way through. But it seems to me like this Substack, where I do intend to be there pretty much daily. Even if it's only on the Substack social media section, the notes. Pretty much daily. I'm hoping that some of you, if you've got to the end of this episode, might join Kim and me on Substack. Subscribe. I know that most of the subscriptions that we have will always be free subscriptions. Only a minority of people will ever, subscribe through the paid service, and nearly all the Substack stuff there will be free. But yes, we will soon be seeking paid subscriptions as well. For those of you who feel like you could support a couple of married hermits doing disparate projects that aren't all one thing. They're not all Tomberg, they're not all Ireland. They're not all the occult replacement of Christianity. Although these things all intersect, at least they do for me in a way. So we will be seeking paid subscribers, but I'll just say that. But it's mainly all going to be free there. But we do need to support our work. And there's also the matter of Buy Me a Coffee. You can also support us at Buy Me a Coffee. Link down below for that. And also my books. There's a link down below for my Amazon author page, where you can see my 3 books. I think that's all I'm going to say for now, ladies and gentlemen. If you've got this far, thank you very much for listening. If you have a charitable comment to leave in the comments, please leave a comment. And that's all I'm going to say. God bless you, ladies and gentlemen, and bye for now.